It was around 3 a.m. A small town named Noel, near the border of Missouri, was as quiet and peaceful during the day as it was deep and mysterious at night. Between the clouds spread across the sky, the faint light of the moon gave just enough glow to reveal the rippling surface of the lake flowing under Oklahoma's Skin Bridge. Most people came to this place for fishing, but that night, something happened that would keep the entire town awake for months to come. Around 7 a.m. in the morning, the streets of Noel began to stir. Like every other day, people started heading toward their shops. In the middle of old wooden buildings stood the State Bank of Noel, a simple bank where a few old men usually sat outside reading newspapers and sipping coffee. That morning, the bank's cashier, Pauline Crowd, arrived first as usual. She carried her coffee mug and wore her usual cheerful smile. But as soon as she saw the bank's door, she froze. The door was already open. Startled, she looked around. There was no guard outside, no sound anywhere. Slowly, she pushed the door open and peeked inside. Counters were scattered, drawers were open, and papers were flying everywhere. Pauline's heartbeat quickened. Her first thought was that maybe the bank president, Dan Short, had arrived early. But when she stepped further inside, the entire bank was silent. No one was there, only broken chairs, open lockers, and the faint clinking of coins on the floor. Her hands started trembling. She immediately picked up the telephone and dialed 911. Bank robbery, someone's broken in. Within minutes, the local police and the sheriff's office arrived at the scene. In a small town like Noel, no one could even imagine something like this happening. The police surrounded the area and stepped inside the bank, their eyes widening in shock. The vault door was half open. Security cameras were coated with thick black spray paint. Nearby lay empty shells of .45 caliber bullets. This was no ordinary theft. Whoever did this had planned it carefully. In one of the cash trays near the counter, a few dollar bills were still lying there. But the strangest thing was that one open drawer still had more than $100,000 untouched. The thieves hadn't even taken it. When FBI agents arrived, they immediately noted that this was not a random robbery. Someone knew exactly what to take and what to leave behind. By now, the news had spread across the entire town. The bank had been robbed. Noel's population was barely 12. Everyone knew everyone. On the streets, in shops, and over the radio, one question echoed everywhere. Who could have done this? Did anyone see anything? Soon, the police informed the FBI since the money deposited in the bank was federally insured. That meant the case was now a federal crime. An expert FBI agent named Liddell Farley immediately left from the nearby city of Joplin. When he arrived, he carefully examined every corner of the bank. Fingerprints on the walls, dirt under the counters, and coin wrappers, everything was recorded. Just then one officer said, "Sir, the bank president Dan Short didn't come to work today." Farley frowned. "What do you mean?" "He's the one who controls the vault keys." Vice President Mark Ullman explained that Dan had been at the bank late last night. He might not have set the time lock. That meant the vault could have been left in standby mode. If someone knew that the time lock wasn't active, they could enter without triggering any alarm. Now suspicion turned in one direction, toward Dan Short. Because the day the bank was robbed was also the day Dan suddenly disappeared. He didn't show up at the office, and he wasn't found at home either. Even his red pickup truck was missing. The FBI quickly formed two theories. Either Dan had been kidnapped, or he was part of the robbery himself. The news of the bank heist had now spread throughout the town. Every street, every shop, and every radio station echoed with one name: Dan Short. People were shocked. A man who had worked at that same bank for 15 years, known to be clean, trustworthy, and kind. Where had he gone? Rumors filled the town. Some said Dan had stolen the money and run away. Others believed he had been kidnapped by the robbers, but no one knew the truth. FBI agent Liddell Farley now took the lead on the case. He first checked the bank's records and security logs. The last entry had been made around 10:45 p.m., meaning Dan was in the bank at that time. After that, there was no further lock recorded. Farley was now convinced that this robbery was impossible without inside help. Because reaching the vault required the code, the key, and the time lock settings, and only 4 people had that information. One of them was Dan Short. The next step was to search Dan's house. His home was near the Arkansas border, surrounded by quiet woods. The team reached there later in the afternoon. The door was closed, but no one answered. Sheriff Don Schlesman gave the door a light push. It opened from inside. The room was eerily silent, as if someone had left in a hurry or had been taken by force. In the kitchen, the trash bin lay overturned. On the living room table sat a half-filled coffee mug. In the bedroom, on the nightstand, was a broken pair of glasses. Agent Farley bent down and picked them up, his expression turning serious. Dan never went anywhere without his glasses, Farley said quietly. That means he either left in a rush, or someone made him leave. They searched every corner of the house. Closets were open, some clothes were missing, but his briefcase, wallet and suit were still there. If he had run away, he would have taken his essentials. This was a clear sign that something was wrong. As the team was leaving the house, a neighbor named Carol Dryden approached the police. There was hesitation on her face, but what she said became the first big clue in the case. Carol said, "Around 2 hours that night, I saw headlights on the road. It looked like several vehicles were pulling into Dan's driveway. A little later they drove off quickly. I heard at least 3 vehicles, a pickup truck, a light-colored van, and maybe a dark truck." Agent Farley immediately started piecing together the timeline. Between 2 hours and 3 hours a.m., vehicles came and went. By 7 a.m. the bank was found open. That meant something happened between 2 hours and 6 hours that morning. Had Dan gone in one of those vehicles, or had he been taken by force? These questions now turned the investigation in a completely new direction. That morning in the town of Noel now felt like a bad dream. A small town where people used to leave their doors unlocked at night was now gripped by fear behind every lock and window. The news of the bank robbery and Dan Short's disappearance had shaken the entire area. Overnight, the quiet town was filled with the sounds of FBI and police sirens. Roads were blocked. Checkpoints and barricades were set up. Every vehicle coming in or going out was being inspected. Radio stations kept making announcements. Dan Short is missing. If anyone has seen suspicious activity, please contact the police immediately. Among the townspeople there were 2 kinds of feelings. Some wanted to help, and others were simply too scared. People were so scared that they could not even step outside their homes. FBI agent Liddell Farley had now taken full control of the case. He called more than 20 agents from the Kansas City office. Local police, state troopers, and volunteers all came together. A command post was set up on the western edge of the town, from where search teams were sent out in every direction. Maps were pinned on the walls. The sound of radio calls filled the room. And in every pair of eyes there was only one question. Where was Dan Short? The search teams divided the area into sectors. Some were sent into the forests, others to the riverside, and some to both sides of the highway. Helicopters were deployed to scan the fields and lakes from above. Thermal cameras were used at night to detect any movement of vehicles or people. But days kept passing, and there was still no trace of Dan Short. On the 3rd day, a new ray of hope appeared. An employee from a nearby factory called the police. "There's a red truck parked in our factory lot. It's been here for hours, and no one has come to take it." The team rushed there immediately. The factory's name was Sibley Manufacturing. As soon as they reached the truck and looked at the number plate, everyone understood. It was Dan Short's truck. In the back of the truck were some coin wrappers, old clothes, and a broken metal tool. The door was unlocked, but there were no signs of any struggle inside. Fingerprints were taken, and all of them belonged only to Dan Short. That meant either he had been in the truck himself, or someone had carefully wiped away every other trace. Now the case had become even more complicated for Agent Farley. On one hand, the bank was robbed. On the other, its president was missing. And now even his truck had been found, but not a single sign of the man. Farley decided it was time to search every inch of the land. He ordered a full search from the area near Dan's truck to his house. At night, the sound of helicopters could be heard echoing through Noel. Police cars, searchlights, and walkie-talkies broke the silence of the town's nights. People stood outside their homes, watching the police drive by. Many offered food and water to help. In the town's church, people gathered to pray for Dan's safe return. But slowly, the hope on their faces was replaced by exhaustion and fear. 5 days had passed. Every street, every field, every bridge had been searched. Still, there was no sign of Dan Short. The FBI then sought help from nearby towns. A task force of 22 agents was formed. To coordinate such a large team, a temporary headquarters was set up in the local armory. There, surrounded by maps, clues, and evidence, Agent Farley sat hunched over his notes. He whispered softly, "If Dan is alive, somewhere this ground is hiding his secret." And if not, his words trailed off. Everyone knew that with each passing day hope was fading, and suspicion was growing. It was the morning of October 11th. A thin mist floated over the surface of Oklahoma's Grand Lake. The silence was broken only by the soft sound of rippling water and the distant hum of a boat engine. Two fishermen, Frank and Alan, arrived at a quiet part of the lake in their small wooden boat. They came here every morning to fish. Same routine, same hope that today their nets would return a little heavier. But that morning the lake gave them something that would shake their souls. Frank noticed something strange floating on the water's surface. At first he thought it was a large plant, maybe washed away from the shore during a storm. But as the boat moved closer, Alan said in a trembling voice, "That's not a plant." The boat stopped, and now it was clear. A human head and hands were floating in the water. The paddle slipped from Frank's hands. "Oh God," he whispered. The stillness of the lake now turned into fear. The cold water and time had badly decomposed the body. The face was almost unrecognizable. But one thing was clear. Someone had deliberately drowned this person. Sheriff Don Schlesman later said, "When we pulled him out, that sight is something I'll never forget. It looked as if someone had tied him to a chair and handed him over to death." The body was brought to the shore and placed on a plastic sheet. Every part of the chain, every corner of the concrete block, and every piece of the wooden chair was carefully removed. FBI agent Liddell Farley arrived at the scene immediately. He collected water samples from the lake. Photographs were taken from every angle. Then the body was sent for post-mortem. Within a few hours the report arrived. Death had occurred 5 days earlier. Around the same time Dan Short went missing. The doctor confirmed that death was caused by drowning. But the victim had been alive before it happened. There were no bullet wounds or cuts on the body. That meant he had been thrown into the water while still alive, tied to the chair. Gases trapped inside the body kept it underwater for a few days, and then slowly it floated to the surface. If those fishermen hadn't been there that morning, the body might never have been found. Now everything was clear. This was not a missing person case, it was a murder. In the back pocket of the pants they found a wallet. Inside were wet bills, a few cards and a driver's license. The name on the license read Daniel Short. Silence fell over everyone. FBI agent Farley sighed and said, "So this was our bank president." For the town of Noel the news struck like lightning. The man who had been under suspicion until yesterday was now dead, and his death had changed everything. Sheriff Schlesman and Agent Farley decided that from this point on, the case would be treated as a homicide investigation. The chair, chain, and concrete block were all sealed as evidence. Every part was examined for fingerprints, scratches, and fibers. All of these items were sent to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. for detailed testing. The town was now filled with silence and fear. People gathered in churches, lighting candles. Many broke down in tears, because this was no longer just about a bank robbery. It was about the death of one of their own. After the body was found in Grand Lake, the case officially became a federal investigation. Dan Short's death had changed everything. It was no longer just a bank robbery. It was a planned murder. FBI agent Liddell Farley and his team were now working day and night. They knew that the chair, the chain, and the duct tape were the real witnesses of this case. The chair recovered from the lake shore was sent to the forensic lab first. Every scratch, fingerprint, and drill mark on the wooden planks was examined inch by inch. Under the rust on the chain, investigators found strange stains, as if someone had recently wiped it with oil or grease. And then there was the duct tape, the one found wrapped around the victim's hands and mouth. That very tape was now becoming the most crucial clue in the entire mystery. Farley made a public appeal through the media. If anyone recognizes this chair or chain or has recently seen such items missing, please contact us immediately. The FBI set up a hotline number. Every day dozens of calls were coming in. Some were false, some were rumors, but a few calls, those were different. Every day dozens of calls were coming in. Some were false, some were rumors, but a few calls gave the case a new direction. The FBI first gathered information about them from the local police. It was revealed that both brothers were known in the area as slightly troublesome boys. They stayed out late at night, drove recklessly, and sometimes got into fights, but they had no major criminal record. Still, A man named Van Boat made another hotline call that completely drew Farley's attention toward these brothers. Van said, "A few weeks ago, my chain hoist was stolen. The same machine used to lift heavy objects. I even reported it. I suspect it was stolen by the Egovsky brothers." Farley immediately took out the pictures of the iron chain and pulley recovered from Grand Lake and showed them to Van Boat. Without hesitation, Van said, "Yes, that's mine. Look at this small scratch mark here. I made it myself when the machine was new." Now everything began to connect. The stolen pulley, the heavy block, and the same chain found tied to Dan Short's chair. All of it pointed in one direction, the Egovsky family. In the town of Noel, restlessness had filled the air. Every newspaper, every radio station, every corner of the town was whispering the same name, the Egovsky brothers. Some said they must be involved. Others said no, they're being framed. But for FBI agent Liddell Farley, it was now time to move beyond suspicion and reach the truth. First, the elder brother Joe Egovsky was called in. He was about 23 years old, tall and confident. As soon as he entered the interrogation room, he sat on the chair like a witness, not like a suspect. Farley asked, "Where were you on the night of October?" Joe replied, "At my girlfriend's house about 40 miles from Noel. I stayed there overnight." Farley asked again, "Any witness?" Joe said calmly, "She can tell you." Farley looked into his eyes. There was a coldness there, but no fear. He felt Joe had come prepared. Every answer rehearsed in advance. After that, the younger brother, Shannon Egovsky, was called in. He was only 18 years old. Shyness and restlessness were written all over his face. As soon as the questioning began, his throat went dry. Farley asked, "Where were you that night?" Shannon hesitated and said, "At home with my mom." Farley asked, "Did anyone see you?" Shannon replied, "No, Mom was asleep." He kept rubbing his hands together, drinking water again and again, his eyes fixed downward. Farley noted that this boy was hiding something. Something was there. The next day, the FBI team reached their house. This time they had a search warrant from the court. Their mother, Sheila Egovsky, stood at the door. She said coldly, "You people are after my sons, while the real culprit is someone else." But the agent said nothing. Every corner of the house, every drawer, every shelf in the garage was searched. Inside the garage, they found old tools, grease-stained clothes, and a small roll of duct tape. The same kind of tape that was found on the chair recovered from the lake. Beside it were some coin wrappers, exactly like the ones stolen from the bank. Everything was speaking for itself. It just needed to be heard. One agent noticed small holes on the garage wall. Farley went closer, touched them with his fingers and said, "These look like .45 caliber bullet marks." The bullet fired in the bank had also been from a toy. The evidence was slowly pointing in one direction. Both handguns recovered from the house were seized and sent for lab testing. A few days later, the report came back, no ballistic match found, meaning the bullet had not been fired from these guns. Farley took a deep breath. Either the guns had been replaced, or the real weapon was somewhere else. Meanwhile, news arrived from the forensic lab in D.C. A fingerprint had been found on the duct tape recovered from the lake. The report only said, "Partial fingerprint recovered." Farley's eyes lit up. "If this print matches any of the suspects," he said, "the entire case could turn around." The print on the duct tape was incomplete, only 2 fingers were visible. But this could be the link that tied everything together. Farley immediately ordered, "Take both brothers' fingerprints again. This time from every finger, every angle." Joe gave his prints without hesitation. He was calm, as if confident that nothing could be proven. But when Shannon's turn came, he hesitated. First he said, "I'll come tomorrow." Then the next morning, he didn't show up. On the phone he said, "I need some time." Farley understood, the one who fears is the one hiding something. 3 days later, Shannon was called again. Only Farley and his assistant were in the room. There was silence in the air. Farley asked softly, "Do you know anything about that chair?" Shannon replied, "No, sir." Farley asked, "Have you ever used a chain hoist or pulley?" Shannon said, "No." Then Farley asked, "Were you at home on the day of the bank robbery?" Shannon avoided his eyes. His lips moved, but no words came out. Farley placed the photo of the chair on the table and said, "Look at this. This is the chair Dan Short was found tied to. If neither you nor your brother had a hand in this, there's no need to be afraid." Shannon looked away from the photo. Sweat drops glistened on his forehead. After a few moments of silence, he said, "We didn't do anything. But people will still blame us." For Farley that was a sign, a mix of fear and guilt. As he left the room, he said quietly, "If the truth isn't against you, it will save you itself." Meanwhile, the lab was still working. Technicians were digitally scanning the partial print from the tape. Every line was being cleaned and enhanced. After entering it into the system, the comparison began on the screen. It was matched with Shannon Egovsky's fingerprints. And then after a few seconds, the machine beeped. "Match found, right thumb, partial alignment 82%. The lab technician immediately called. "Sir, we have a match." Farley took the report in his hands and said, "Now it's time to get the truth out of these brothers, no matter what." But the real victory was yet to come, from the final forensic report. The FBI lab in Washington, D.C. had informed that they had reprocessed the duct tape fingerprint using advanced image reconstruction. They removed the old smudges and converted every ridge and line into a digital pattern. Slowly the full fingerprint appeared on the screen, loops, arches, and ridges. Farley stood there when the technician said, "Sir, it's clear now, and it matches only one person." The file was opened. It was Shannon Egovsky's. For a few seconds, silence filled the room. Farley closed his eyes and said softly, "So now it's not just suspicion, it's proof." That evening, he briefed his team. "The fingerprint on the duct tape matches Shannon Egovsky's right hand," he said. But Farley added, "Not yet, we must complete the full chain of evidence." He looked again at the photos from Joe Egovsky's garage, oil marks on the wall, chain stains on the floor, and an old stool with a hanging rope. Now the FBI had 3 solid pieces of evidence against them: the duct tape fingerprint, Van Boot's testimony, and the chain recovered from the lake. But Agent Liddell Farley wanted one final psychological test before taking the case to court, to draw the truth directly from Shannon's own body. It was morning when Shannon was called to the FBI office. The room was silent. In the middle stood a polygraph machine, recording heartbeat, breathing rate, and every muscle movement. Farley said calmly, "Shannon, we just want to see if you're telling the truth or not." As soon as he sat on the chair, sensors were attached to his hands, clips on his fingers, and a belt around his chest. He trembled slightly. The test began. "First question, is your name Shannon Egovsky?" "Yes." The line stayed steady. "Second question, do you know Noel National Bank?" "Yes." The line showed a slight rise. "Third question, did you drive near the bank on the night of October 10? A few seconds of silence, then the answer, "No." But the lines jumped sharply. Heartbeat faster, breathing irregular. The operator looked at Farley. Farley nodded quietly. "Continue." Next questions came. "Did you see Dan Short that night?" "No." The line jumped again. "Were your hands wrapped with duct tape?" "No." Now the lines went completely erratic, as if the body itself was trying to push the lie out. The test ended. The operator said softly, "Sir, subject failed the test." Farley said nothing. He just looked at Shannon and said, "Sometimes a man lies so much, he forgets that his breath still tells the truth." Shannon quietly walked out. He no longer looked confident. That evening, Farley called the entire team. Every piece of evidence, every report was laid out on the table. "Now we move to the legal front," he said. "The grand jury will be summoned so we can formally present the case in court." The grand jury summons was issued. 23 citizens of Noel were called. The FBI presented the evidence before them: the duct tape photographs, the chain hoist report, and the forensic analysis. But one link was still missing: the official fingerprint comparison report. The report from Washington, D.C. was taking time. Farley called every day. "Is the match confirmed yet?" Every time the same reply: "Work in progress, sir." He knew the entire case depended on this one report. If the fingerprint didn't match, everything would collapse. But if it did, the Egovsky brothers' freedom would end. Meanwhile, the media frenzy had exploded. Then after a few days, a message arrived from the lab: "Final fingerprint comparison ready." He opened the file. His eyes moved across each page. On the final line it read, "Fingerprint match confirmed with Shannon Egovsky, verified by 2 analysts." Farley's fingers stopped on the page. He whispered softly, "The game's over, Shannon." Outside, the rain had started. Raindrops hit the window as Farley placed the file carefully into his briefcase. The file that would end someone's freedom and deliver justice to another. Now the next step was clear. Outside the FBI headquarters, the rain kept falling on the glass. The sound of raindrops made the silence of the room even deeper. Agent Liddell Farley sat at his desk. In front of him was the same file with bold letters written on it. Forensic report, duct tape fingerprint. He opened the file, and as soon as he read the first line, his eyes froze. Fingerprint matched with Shane Egowski, confirmed by 2 independent analysts. In that moment, the room seemed to stop. Months of effort, every interrogation, every search, every testimony, the answer to all of it was contained in a single line. Farley slowly closed the file, took a deep breath, and said softly, "Now there's no doubt left. This is the man who tied Dan Short to the chair." That evening the team was gathered. All the pictures of the case were pinned to the wall. The broken bank door, the chair pulled out from the lake, the last picture of Dan Short, and the Egowski brothers' profiles. Farley pointed toward the map and said, "The fingerprint on the duct tape belongs only to Shannon. That's the backbone of this case. Now we have to arrest him. But without any mistake, the Egowski who is still free is clever. If he gets a hint, he'll escape." The agents nodded. The planning for the operation began. Farley wanted the arrest to be clean and lawful, leaving no loopholes in court. The next morning, the sky over Noel Town was covered with clouds. 3 FBI cars quietly moved toward the Egowski family's house. Outside the house stood an old brown van, the same one some witnesses had seen on the night of the bank robbery. As soon as the agents opened the gate, Sheila Egowski came out from inside. "What now? You've come to bother my sons again," she said. Farley replied calmly, "Ma'am, we have a court warrant. We need to take Shannon into custody." Shannon came out from inside. His face looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, but there was still a little defiance left in him. He said, "I didn't do anything. You framed me with false evidence." Farley opened the file and said, "Your fingerprints were found on the duct tape, the same tape wrapped around Dan Short's hands. There's no place left for lies." Shannon wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. The agents handcuffed him. Sheila's eyes filled with tears. "My son didn't kill anyone. I swear to God," she cried. People standing in the street were peeking through their windows. Some faces showed relief, as if years of fear had finally found a name. Some faces showed pity. Such a young boy, such a big crime. The FBI convoy took him straight to headquarters. Throughout the ride, Shannon remained silent. Sometimes he looked out at the rain, sometimes at his handcuffs. Farley sat across from him. He said, "You still have a chance, Shannon. If you tell the truth, your sentence can be light." Shannon's eyes filled with tears. After a moment he said softly, "We just wanted to rob the bank. We didn't mean to kill anyone. It all happened too fast." "Who do you mean by we?" Farley asked. Shannon said nothing. The room fell silent. Only the sound of thunder echoed outside. Meanwhile, Joe Egowski was still free. His cleverness was that he never told a direct lie. He only hid parts of the truth. He had hired a lawyer and told the police, "I wasn't involved in any of my brother's actions." But Farley knew Joe was the real mind behind the whole operation. The team increased surveillance on Joe's movements. Phones were tapped. His old friends were questioned. One night when Joe was talking quietly to someone in his garage, the recording caught his voice clearly. "That stupid boy will open his mouth. I have to end it all." For Farley, that recording was like a gold mine. Now he knew Joe would even sacrifice his brother to save himself. The next day, Shannon was presented in court. A crowd had gathered. Every newspaper in town carried the same headline. In front of the judge, Farley presented all the evidence: the duct tape fingerprint report, the testimony of Chen Host, and the link to the theft. Shannon's lawyer said, "My client is a minor. He has been framed. The evidence doesn't lie. His fingerprint is on the murder weapon." The judge gave a brief order. The accused, Shannon Egowski, will remain in federal custody pending trial. Shannon was taken back to jail. His face no longer showed exhaustion, but a strange kind of relief, as if the burden inside him had finally been revealed. That night, Farley sat alone in his office, staring at the pictures on the wall. Dan Short, the bank's map, the aerial view of the lake, and now Shannon's arrest report. He whispered, "One has fallen. Now it's time for the mind that planned it all." The rain had stopped. Silence had returned to the city streets. But Farley knew true peace would only come when Joe Egowski was also behind bars. He wrote in his diary, "Justice has begun, but the story isn't over yet." The rain had stopped. The streets of Noel were peaceful again. But inside the FBI headquarters, the echo of that case still lingered. the case that had stolen the sleep of an entire town. Agent Liddell Farley looked at Shannon Igowski sitting before him. His face was now broken. He was no longer the same boy who had tried to appear brave in front of the polygraph machine weeks ago. Now his words carried exhaustion, and his eyes regret. "Do you want to tell the truth?" Farley asked quietly. Shannon bowed his head, then said softly, "Yes. I can't lie anymore." The recorder was turned on, and what began next was a confession, one that would become the final chapter of this story. Sometimes the truth coming out is as terrifying as it is necessary. The hidden parts of this story were now slowly coming to light, the reasons behind what happened, and the fear that hid behind those reasons. It was the night of October 10, Shannon said. "Joe told me that the bank had a lot of cash, and if we chose the right time, no one would ever know. We'd just take the money. No one would get hurt." Farley asked, "How did Dan Short get involved?" Shannon closed his eyes. "Joe said Dan was the only one who could open the bank's lock. If we took him at night, we could get inside without breaking anything." His voice trembled. "We followed his car. Around 9 p.m., when he reached home, we caught him at gunpoint. He was terrified, kept saying, 'Take whatever you want, just let me go.' But Joe, he was different that night." Joe Igowski, who had always been quiet, was the real brain behind it all. Shannon continued, "We tied Dan to a chair and covered his eyes with tape so he couldn't recognize us. Joe said if he told the police, everything would be over. I got scared, but it was already too late." They both reached the bank. The door opened with Dan's card. They took money from the locker, about $1,000. Joe said, "Now let's leave him somewhere. We can't let him live, he'll recognize us." I said, "No, Joe, let him go," but Joe didn't listen. The chair, the chain, and the block were already in the truck. They tied Dan to that chair, attached the chain, and drove toward Grand Lake. It was around 2 a.m. The moonlight was dim. The water looked black. Dan said one last time, "God will never forgive you." And then they pushed him into the water. The room fell silent. Tears rolled down Shannon's cheeks. "I never thought he would die. We just wanted to scare him. But when he went into the water, I couldn't do anything." Farley turned off the recorder. The truth he had been searching for months was finally in front of him. Joe and Shannon had planned the Noel bank robbery together, and greed had taken them to a point where humanity ended. A few weeks later, the case began in the federal court of Missouri. The courtroom was full of people. In front sat Dan Short's family. Their eyes held not anger, but deep exhaustion. The prosecutor presented the evidence: the duct tape fingerprint, the testimony of Wayne Board, the chair found in the lake, and Shannon's written confession. Every word had now become a stone. Joe's defense team tried their best. They said Shannon's confession was forced, and that there was no direct evidence against Joe. But the court was shown the audio recording, the one where Joe said, "That stupid boy will open his mouth. I have to end it all." It changed everything. The judge announced the verdict. This crime was not just a murder, it was a conspiracy against humanity. Taking a life for money is considered the most heinous crime in this court. Joe Igowski and Shannon Igowski were both sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom was silent. Dan Short's son said only one thing: "Maybe now my father's soul will rest in peace." Shannon bowed his head and cried. Joe stared straight ahead without remorse, as if the human inside him had died long ago. Outside, Agent Farley took a deep breath. Months of chasing leads, sleepless nights, and endless searching. All of it had come to an end today. But there was no joy in his eyes, only heaviness. Because though justice had been done, humanity had once again lost. The lake was still the same, calm, cold, and deep. The chair was no longer there, but its story had become history. Farley stood at the edge of the lake and whispered, "Dan Short, you got your justice. But this town has lost its innocence." He looked into the water. The waves touched the shore softly, as if still carrying the echo of an old secret. Noel town was quiet again. But within that silence, one voice would always echo, reminding everyone that the highest price of greed is a human life.